Hi, and welcome to Strategy Stuff. This is a video series I originally made for Caspian Report on the geostrategic analysis of the Peloponnesian War. Previously, we went over the opening strategies of Athens and Sparta. Now, with their failure and the death of the first generation of leaders, in this third video, we look at how both sides adapted to the developing war. At the start of the war, Athens and Sparta hoped to leverage their respective dominances, on sea or on land, to decisively defeat the other side. From Athens, Pericles played a long game, launching naval raids against Spartan allies in the hope that their defection would eventually grant numerical superiority on land. From Sparta, Archidamus selectively ravaged Athenian territory, hoping to lure the Athenians into a premature battle. Neither plan had achieved much by the time this first generation of leaders passed by 427 BC. While the strategic goals remain unchanged, the new generation of Athenian and Spartan leaders had to grapple with the changing nature of the war. Previously, we talked about a Greek conventional strategy where war revolved around decisive land battles while minimizing human, time, and financial costs. This was what the Greeks expected to fight at the start of the Peloponnesian War. But by 427 BC, it was clear that this time was different. In wars past, when armies cut cities off from local farms, the result was either a battle or surrender. But now, from Potidaea in 432 to rebelling Mytilene in 428 to famous Plataea in 427, cities instead preferred to hunker down for a long siege. Why the change? The reason lay in the alliance networks of Athens and Sparta. A besieged city without hope of reinforcement is just delaying the inevitable, but with a nearby power promising relief, some now saw political gain in enduring a few months' hardship. The collective result was a vast increase in war costs, the sort that derailed Pericles' opening gambit, and as exhaustion set in, the search for more decisive solutions grew more urgent. One way of achieving decision was to expand the war into new theaters and try and win there. This was what Sparta did in 430, when it extended the war into the semi-tamed lands of northwestern Greece. A link between the Peloponnesians and their kin in Sicily, northwestern Greece housed an Athenian base at Naupactus, anchoring Athens' encirclement of the Spartan alliance. Now, the local Ambraciots were asking Sparta to help with their Acarnanian enemies, promising to deliver Naupactus if they won, and the Spartans agreed. The resulting campaigns in the northwest were a period of strategic evolution for Sparta and Athens. First, it showed the Spartans that overcoming Athenian naval dominance was a fearsome task. King Archidamus might have thought otherwise, but many Spartans expected their hoplites to dominate the sea as easily as they did the land. The revolt of the Athenian tributary of Mytilene in 428, encouraged by the thought of Spartan help, shows that this was not an uncommon view. This expectation was soon shattered. Back in the northwest, a small but skilled Athenian force would twice repel Peloponnesian fleets in 429, leaving the nearby Spartan land forces isolated and vulnerable. Furthermore, these defeats carried powerful strategic consequences. They convinced Spartan sympathizers, and even Sparta itself, that the sea would remain under Athenian rule, which meant that anybody fighting for Sparta overseas was going to be doing it alone. When a Spartan task force under Alcidas dashed across the Aegean in 427 to rouse Athens' other tributaries, and perhaps even Persia, into war, he instead was received coolly, and, as if to demonstrate why, quickly fled before his Athenian pursuers. Alcidas would then go back to the northwest, and neutralize the important Athenian ally of Corcyra by instigating a civil war, but fundamentally, the Peloponnesians were stuck in a strategic dilemma. To defeat the Athenian navy, they needed the help of overseas allies, but without defeating the Athenian navy, no overseas ally would dare help them. Athens would gain far more from its northwestern experience. Reinforcing Naupactus in 428, Athenian forces under Demosthenes arrived too late to help their Acarnanian allies repel the isolated Spartans in 429. Demosthenes decided then to move east against the Boeotian League, hoping to knock out this wing of the Spartan alliance by surprising it from its weakly defended rear. But as it turned out, there was a good reason why the Boeotians never bothered with the place. The locals fought in a way completely alien to and completely effective against Greek hoplites. Taking advantage of the broken terrain, their skirmishers harassed, ambushed, and finally destroyed Demosthenes' force. Demosthenes learned from his disaster. When, in 426, Sparta again joined with the Ambraciots in invading the northwest, his force would respond in local fashion. Combining skirmisher forces, unconventional tactics, and political trickery into one operations package, Demosthenes would utterly annihilate the invaders, to such an extent that all sides agreed to maintain the northwestern status quo for the next century, which safeguarded Athens' pre-existing position there. More importantly, Demosthenes had found a way to defeat the Spartans in battle. The creation of Demosthenes' operations package coincided with a new strategy in Athens. Although Pericles had died in 429, power stayed with the democratic faction he once led. If anything, its power increased as the Athenian masses, who so far had seen the most fighting as sailors in the navy, leveraged their sacrifice to demand further concessions. Thucydides identifies their key leader as the demagogue Cleon. Cleon's strategic outlook, like the offensive interpretation of Pericles, was unambiguously imperial, in that he saw the Peloponnesian War as a fundamental struggle that would be decisively settled in favor of one side or the other. But having seen Pericles' plan stall into an unsustainable stalemate, Cleon recognized that even Athens needed more money to pay for spiraling war costs. The easiest way to increase income was to double the tribute on its hapless empire, but if that caused tributaries to revolt, Athens risked having to spend even more on military suppression. Was there a financially efficient way to hold down the empire? Cleon's response began with the assumption that Athens could overawe its tributaries by flexing its military muscles. After all, it was way past time to recognize the Delian League for what it truly was, not a consensual self-defense league against the Persians, but instead an empire where, to quote the notorious Melian dialogue, the strong do what they will, and the weak suffer what they must. By demonstrating that Athens was both incomparably strong and willing to use its strength to bully the weak, the city might just inject enough fear into its tributaries to stop them in their tracks. This effect could not be achieved with Pericles' cautious strategy, and thus Cleon replaced it with a more muscular policy. Against rebelling Mytilene, Cleon's demand for mass executions was only narrowly vetoed by the assembly. In the wider Mediterranean, Athens would take a more directly interventionist stance. Whereas Pericles preferred to pay the Thracians to invade Sparta's ally Macedon, Cleon now launched task forces into Crete and Sicily, showing that no corner of the Greek world was too far from the city's reach. The Spartan alliance was, of course, not exempt from this. Many revolters expected that any Athenian response against them would be blunted by Sparta's military power. If Athens could ramp up the raids on Sparta's allies, or build forts directly on Sparta's doorstep, Sparta's military shortcomings would be revealed to Greece, and in doing so, not just rob Athens' tributaries of the hope of foreign aid, but perhaps also cause Sparta's helots and allies to come over to Athens as well. In this, Cleon had the fortune to seize on a unique opportunity, the operations package developed by Demosthenes in the northwest. and especially turned Athens' forts from being shameful irritants into actual strategic lures, drawing in blockading forces which could then be destroyed by counter-blockading units utilizing anti-hoplite tactics. This combination immediately delivered a major success. In 425, Demosthenes built a fort at Pylos, near the Helot homeland of Messenia. That drew in a Spartan force, which, after failing to storm the fort, decided to blockade it by occupying the nearby island of Sphacteria. Predictably, that meant that when the reinforcing Athenian fleet arrived, the Spartans on the island were isolated in turn. Now, Cleon cooperated with Demosthenes, and once again using skirmishers, unconventional tactics, and political trickery, the Athenians came out of Sphacteria with 120 elite Spartan captives, the entire Spartan fleet, and an immense blow to Spartan prestige. Many historians consider Sphacteria to be the height of Athens' power in the war. After all, if it could beat Sparta, then who else stood a chance? As if to emphasize this, Athens' ultimatum, demanding an end to invading Attica in return for sparing the 120 Sphacteria captives, was meekly obeyed by Sparta. In that moment, it seemed as if the Athenian hegemony had already begun. Sparta and its sympathizers may have been overawed after Sphacteria, but the Peloponnesian War was still ongoing, so what should Athens do now to win the war? Some historians argue that Cleon should have accepted the subsequent Spartan offer for white peace, but as mentioned in the previous video, such a peace was really little better than a truce. In any case, Athens had a winning hand, and it was reasonable to press the advantage further. Cleon's counter-demands to Sparta show what Athenians considered a proper peace. Couched in terms of restoring what Athens had lost in the First Peloponnesian War 20 years ago, Cleon demanded control over the Corinthian Isthmus through Megara, control over the Corinthian Gulf through Achaea, control over the ports linking Athens to Spartan rival Argos, and implicitly, the freedom to deal with Boeotia and recapture it into the Athenian orbit. In short, Athens wanted a stranglehold over Greece and what remained of the Spartan alliance, which was hegemony in all but name. This was more or less what Pericles' strategic offensive was aiming for. Obviously, the Spartans would reject this, but after Sphacteria, the question was less what the Spartans would allow, and more what the Athenians could take. Over the next 2 years, Athens would intensify Pericles' plan to surround the Peloponnese with war, building even more forts on the Peloponnesian coast, while launching attacks on the most exposed of Spartan allies, Corinth, Megara, and the cities near Argos. It's easy to see this as Athenian hubris, but at the same time, it was best to exploit Demosthenes' operational advantage while it lasted. After all, even the Spartans were moving away from their traditional all-hoplite army and recruiting their own cavalry and archers. In any case, we need to qualify the Athenian success. Granted, in many cases, Athens seems suddenly to be pushing at an open door. Resistance from Megara and the cities near Argos fell away, achieving in months what Pericles' immense spending had failed to do for years. But Cleon's strategy by itself did not deliver a fatal blow to Sparta, or bypass the need for a decisive battle. The Helots did not desert to the forts en masse and destroy the Spartan economy. Spartan morale was not so crushed that it would give up the hegemony. Athens' continuing efforts to force the defection of Sparta's key allies were also unsuccessful. In 424, an attempt to seize Megara via coup narrowly failed thanks to the timely arrival of the Spartan general Brasidas, but the far greater prize was Boeotia, the defection of which would end the specter of a two-front war. Athens therefore invaded central Greece from the northeast, southeast, and the southwest, not to split the Boeotian defenders in preparation for a decisive battle, but instead to build forts, sow panic and confusion, and create conditions for a pro-Athenian coup across Boeotia. As it turns out, the Boeotians under Theban leadership caught and defeated the Athenian main army at Delium, proving that Athens' newfound prowess on land was still not enough to win a decisive battle. Still, Delium itself was merely a setback, not a turning point. Athens still had its resource base and its operations package, and time would only make Athens stronger and better prepared for the decisive showdown. While Athens was ramping up its attacks, Sparta, by contrast, had sunk into paralysis, unable to solve its fundamental strategic problem. King Archidamus had recognized that the Spartan alliance had to seize sea control in order to strike effectively at Athens, but even he overlooked the conundrum that, without a successful Spartan fleet, no overseas power would supply the funds or ships for such a fleet. The attempts at eroding Athens' naval power by capturing Naupactus in the northwest had failed miserably. Another attempt to build a naval base at central Greece also came to similar ruin. So the defeat at Sphacteria did not create Sparta's problems, but only accelerated its sense of exhaustion. Even without the fear of Helot rebellion, or the captives still in Athens, the Spartan army lacked reachable targets. But on the other hand, staying at home gave Athens more time to strengthen and peel off vulnerable allies. And speaking of time, the peace treaty with Argos, due to end in 421, was almost over. Under unfavorable time pressure, Sparta banked on what could only be described as a gamble. Brasidas' expedition to the north was mainly meant to solve one problem, which was to take rebellious Helots out of the homeland. Officially, his 2,000-man force, containing Helots and mercenaries but few Spartan citizens, was to assist Macedon in harassing the Athenian tributaries of the Greek northeast, but this entailed crossing the entire length of Greece, a feat which was logistically difficult, military hazardous, and probably intended to be fatal. That the force achieved so much more is entirely due to the acumen of its leader, Brasidas. Like Demosthenes, Brasidas appreciated the benefits of combining warfighting and politics into a holistic operations package. Whereas Demosthenes used political trickery to outfox his enemies, Brasidas would unfurl the banner of Greek liberty to win over Athens' tributaries to his cause. After stopping the Athenian coup in Megara, Brasidas marched the length of Greece, did the minimum for the Macedonians, and then sped to the Greek northeast, where he convinced Athens' local tributaries to revolt against their overlord. The skill required to pull this off can be judged from the panic reaction of the unprepared Athenians, with Thucydides himself dashing towards the city of Amphipolis and then being exiled by Cleon after it nevertheless defected to Brasidas. The northeast produced 30% of Athens' tribute, and its fall was a major setback to the war effort. At the same time, we again need to place Brasidas' efforts into perspective. The ease by which he got Athens' tributaries to defect bode ominously for the stability of the Delian League. But despite taking away a third of Athens' income, Sparta still had no reliable way of reaching the rest of the empire that lay overseas. Unlike Demosthenes in the northwest, Brasidas' northeastern campaign did not uncover a method to beat Athens at its naval game, but instead offered the opportunity to get out of an unwinnable war. It was this understanding that informed Sparta's decision to drop its gains and settle for a white peace with Athens, first via truce in 423, and then for 50 years in 422. Sometimes criticized as a wasted opportunity done merely to get the 120 Sphacteria Spartans back, The fact was that Sparta had no use for Brasidas' gains. They did not want to deploy their limited forces so far away, and they certainly understood that piecing out would still leave Athens with a rebellious region to recapture. In any case, Brasidas was becoming dangerously independent, first disobeying the truce with Athens and then breaking Sparta's alliance with Macedon. Cutting him loose was the right call. As exemplars for the second leadership generation in the Peloponnesian War, it is fitting that Cleon and Brasidas would both die on the same occasion. In 422, as the truce between Athens and Sparta expired, Cleon attempted to recapture the northeastern city of Amphipolis, and both he and Brasidas were killed in the ensuing battle. With this latest Athenian effort dissolving into the ether, and with the key pro-war advocates in both cities now dead, the Peace of Nicaeas was signed soon after, with minor concessions to Athens and Boeotia. Yet again, despite all the new strategies, war escalation, and bloodshed, both cities would arrive only at a stalemate. This does not mean that Athens and Sparta were on equal levels throughout what became known as the Archidamian War. Athens repeatedly got the better of Sparta, partly because of Sparta's inability to bring the war to Athens, and partly because Athens found a way to beat Sparta on land before Sparta found one for Athens on water. In this sense, Athens had less reason to sign the Peace of Nicaeas. It did so because of the panic created by Brasidas, as well as the replacement of the pro-war Cleon with the pro-peace Nicaeas. The peace was meant to last for 50 years, but as both Athenians and Spartans recognized previously, a white peace was only a truce between wars. Almost immediately, both sides began a new round of scheming, and another generation took up the reins for war. Thanks for watching the video, and please do give a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the comments section. This is part of a longer video series I originally made for Caspian Report, and the final 2 videos should be coming out shortly.